Are you questioning whether you're in the right role or the right organization? Do you find yourself getting increasingly frustrated at the environment around you? If so, you are definitely not alone. As a matter of fact, the Great Resignation, or the Great Reshuffling as the name evolves, has shown us that many are now questioning whether their work environment is working for them. But before you rush to the nearest exit, my guest this week, Taylor Short, shares that when we find ourselves in these situations, the best approach is to start with ourselves. When we understand who we are and how to better engage with the environments around us, we can make peace with our workplaces and feel more empowered in our own lives. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. It is so great to meet you, Taylor. I'm so excited for our conversation. Before we jump in, I'd love to invite you to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And it's always so refreshing to hear about others doing amazing work in our careers and our workspace. So thank you for having me. And so my name is Taylor Short, and I am what I call myself as a job reset coach. And I kind of have three pillars that I work with. So I partner with nature. I use mindfulness-based techniques, and then also integrate human design into the work that I do. But essentially, what I help people do is find their way back to harmony in their jobs and their life. And so I'm sure we'll get into more of my background, but that's like the highest level. And then we can go as deep as you want into all the good stuff. So yeah, that's who I am.
That's perfect. And I'm curious what you think the big pain points are right now when people come to you. You mentioned coming back to harmony. What are they struggling with? What brings them to you?
Yes, I love diving into this right away. So it changes, but I think what I've been seeing, and then based on just my own intuition, I guess, that's telling me, we saw what we called the Great Resignation, and then we were calling it the Great Reshuffling. And there's terms that I'm hearing now, quiet quitting and all of these things. And really, I think it's, first of all, I would say when you're seeing this happen so globally, especially like massively in the United States, I think at one point I saw upwards of 90% of people were looking for another job, which, how those numbers come about. But that to me is an indicator that it's not just one industry. Like, it's not just our healthcare system, right? But it's kind of indicative to me of a broken workforce system overall. And that's not to say that it's bad. I just think we've gotten to a tipping point, especially through the pandemic, of people really having a chance, whether they wanted to or not, to pause in their life and then do a little bit of soul searching. And what I think we're really seeing is this result of people coming back to who they truly are within. And what I talk about a lot in the workplace is we're kind of used to showing up as a different person, as maybe we have like our home selves and then our work selves. And I think people are tired of that kind of pull. And so my real belief is that a lot of what we're seeing is people truly wanting to be who they are at their core. And so they're kind of rejecting these workplaces that don't see them as their true selves, if that makes sense. So there's so many different things, but I think for me, one of the main things that I really focus on is helping people feel individually unique because you're all so beautiful and perfect and complex as an individual within an organization. But how do we do that in the workplace is kind of what we work on. So,
Oh, I have so many questions. I feel like we could go down so many roads. I want to pick up on what you just said about feeling individually unique, because one of the things that I think a lot about, especially in the context of imposter syndrome, is this just tension that we have between wanting to be like everyone else and conform, not stand out too much, but also to feel special, right? We don't want to get lost in the shuffle, but we also don't want to be too different from the people around us, because then we start to doubt ourselves. So when you think about helping people to recognize what makes them unique, what does that look like?
yeah, I love that. This has been like, we get on our little kicks of like things that was lighting us up. This has been my recent one. I've been just loving this. Like, we want to fit in, but we also are so special and cool and perfect as we are individually. And I feel like that's a mix of our very ancestral brains that we have. Like, we literally need to survive, which I'm sure you're so poised around this idea of like, we have to fit in, especially around imposter syndrome. Holy cow. Like, we don't really want to stand out. But then it's like, are we having this shift of like, how do we stand out and how do we feel special? And I talk about that too, because it is such a balance. And some people don't want to actually be seen in the traditional sense that we say, or acknowledged publicly, right? But I think at our core, it's really a human need to be acknowledged and seen for all of the gifts that we have and all of the pains as well that we come with. And so the way that I've been bringing this into my work is really through the pillar of human design, which I don't know whether or not you've heard of it or not.
Can you say more? Because I don't know a lot about it, and there are probably other people who are listening who don't either.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want, I have so much on this because it's a massively complex system that's comprised of 5 to 7 other complex systems. But essentially, what it is if you've all heard of like the different types of personality tests that we usually see, or aptitude tests at work, we've got like the DISC profile, we've got the Enneagram, Strength Finder, all of these different types of things. Those are all great, but they typically put us into a category of like, okay, you're one of 4 types or you're one of 7 types. Human design is a system like that is based on your individual design. So not one chart, there's a chart that we all have, will be like anyone else's. And like I said, it's made up of multiple different systems. But what it does is it shows us how we are energetically aligned to be and interact with others in this world so that we can find the path of least resistance and most ease. So without like bombarding this whole interview with what human design is, the reason why I love it so much is because it shows, like, even if you were a twin, it would show how different you are than your twin. And this is so massively beneficial in the workplace because we're craving that, like you were explaining, that individuality kind of helps us to see like, oh yes, this is me. And then also to help us figure out how to interact with others in that kind of community of our workspace. So I hope that helps.
Yes, yes. And that's so fascinating too, because I think that those points are really important in the sense that you want to understand who you are. And that's really powerful. But it's also really important to understand who's around you and how that influences you. Because so often when I'm talking to people who are struggling in the workplace, they blame themselves. And they think there must be something wrong with me. Why am I not more like my colleagues? Why does everyone else seem to have it all together? And a lot of times it's not about you being wrong or even about them being wrong. It's a lack of fit. And I think that we don't necessarily, we might intellectually recognize that, but that's not something that we necessarily attribute the challenge to. when we find ourselves in a difficult situation at work. And so it becomes this thing that undermines our confidence and makes us feel like we're not good enough.
Oh my gosh. Well said, truly. I mean, so felt, I think, for probably all of your listeners that are listening to this right now, of really like, is it me? Is it them? Maybe it's a mix of both, I think. But the thing that we can fall into is thinking as humans, we need to be perfect. And just as I partner with nature as well, when you look at nature, like nothing in nature is perfect, but it works out perfectly well, you know? So we're perfectly imperfect. And I think that, yeah, we can fall into this. And that has been, I got into human design myself just for my own personal growth, and then started learning more about it and seeing how massively beneficial it could be for people in the workplace. But that was a side effect that I was not anticipating, was how much compassion and how much heart I had for seeing individuals, even in my closest, like my husband, my son, all of these things. I'm like, whoa, they're actually not doing this to drive me crazy, or I'm not doing this to drive them crazy. Like, this is actually how I'm designed. And I just saw a meme not too long ago that I'm like, I've got to repurpose this somehow. But it said something like, when you know you can't be mad at anybody because you know understand so much about the different types of people.
It's so true. I have so often used that when I'm arguing with my husband, who just has a very different way of thinking and operating than I do. And so I'll be like, he's not doing it to me, right? That's just that part of his personality. And it's so empowering when you get that, when you know yourself and you know that what people around you are doing is not intentionally targeted at you, right? You just feel like you have more choices, you have more empathy. The situation just becomes more tolerable inherently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. Really more tolerable too. And I think the point that you were making earlier on, it can be so empowering to also understand that we're not all meant to be salespeople. We're not all meant to be the detailed person, you know, and you hit on this earlier. We see that so much in the workplace. Like, okay, Susie does this amazingly. I want everybody to do it just like her. Or we can just think that internally, right? She's getting these results. Now I have to fit into her mold, which isn't correct for any of us, you know? So I think I wanted to mention that was a super awesome point as well that you had said there.
One thing I'm wondering, and I don't know if this is beyond the scope of your work, but I wonder how you think about how this fits into workplaces when so much of workplaces are driven by efficiency and results and outcomes, and there isn't, I believe, a sufficient level of attention to humanity. I think that is slowly changing as a result of everything that's happened over the last few years with the pandemic. And my hope is that pressures like the Great Resignation and even quiet quitting are going to push companies into really thinking about what do we need to do at a human level to engage our most valuable resource, right? But when we think about all of this insight is so empowering to us as individuals and even as a collective, but what happens when workplaces don't value that, when they still have those very antiquated views of leadership and how to get things done? You mentioned upwards of 90% of people looking for a new job. If they just go from one dysfunctional place to another, it doesn't solve the problem. So how do you think about the system that everyone's operating within?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge mountain to climb, right? And so there's a few different thoughts that I have on this. First of all, it's like when we have what we're seeing indicative of a broken system, it's like something's going to have to change. And I'll say in the beginning of this, I think there are going to be those companies like that quote, you know, if you don't adapt, then you'll fall behind. I think there will always be those type of companies and maybe leadership that just say it's my way or the highway. But I think there will always also start to see other companies, and we are seeing it, who are becoming what I call kind of employee obsessed. If you focus and you hyper focus on your employees and really putting your time and your effort there, that is like leading from the ground up, and you'll see it trickle throughout your sales, throughout your, your clients, your customers. All of these things are going to be so much better when you focus on your employees. So I think it's already kind of happening. And also to your point of, jumping from toxic, or I can't remember the term you used, but or dysfunctional company to company. The part of the work that I do, and I believe so strongly, is when we focus on what we can do internally, regardless of what company we're in, then that's where we see our external start to shift as well. So it's not as glamorous and fun to say like, oh, I want to do all of this self work for me. But truly, I've seen it time and time again, is there, the dysfunction doesn't really touch you as much when you have done your work internally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really powerful insight, because I think about that a lot too. What can we control within our own environment? Excuse me. And what is sort of out there that we just have to either let go of or adapt to. And so I think that what you're saying is really powerful, because if I can control what's within my control, I'm not as affected by the environment around me.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be, this word comes out a lot, I don't really particularly love it, but toxic leadership or toxic workplace. But I really think that it's a lot less out there as we've been, I just think it's a kind of a touchy subject, right? I think that there are time and place that you should move, and there are companies that might be challenging. But again, when we start to look at the individual level and how can I create a successful workspace for myself, then we're not putting so much of that challenge, I guess, on the actual workplace. That did not come out well, but I hope that
I know exactly what you're saying. No, and I think that makes perfect sense, right? Because if we're stuck on the environment, we're never going to feel like we found the right fit, because like you said, everything's imperfect. And so if I'm choosing to focus on what's not working within every environment, and certainly there are, like you said, right, there are times when you need to leave and times when you can better navigate an existing imperfect environment, right? But really where the power comes from is recognizing, what do I need in order to be my best self and to do my best work? And how can I apply that wherever I am, independent of whatever the environmental conditions are?
Yes, exactly. Thank you for wrapping that up so beautifully.
Well, I'm wondering too, so I guess if there are people listening and thinking, maybe this is me that she's talking about, right? Like, what are the indicators that maybe I could use some of this work?
Yeah. Whew. Are you talking specifically about just overall what we're talking about, or specifically around like, is this my environment or is it me?
I was thinking more generally, but I would say whatever comes to mind for you in terms of a response. I'm just thinking that people are probably processing what you're saying and thinking, I wonder if this is something that I could really benefit from spending some more time working on or thinking about.
Okay, yeah, great. So I would first of all say this type of work is you have to have so much grace for yourself, right? Especially when we're talking about things like imposter syndrome. These things, we can beat ourselves up so much. And also when we start to get into what I call like blaming our boss or blaming our work for our unhappiness, that is kind of a survival technique that we have, and it can be a lot easier. So I would first off say, if you're kind of raising your hand and like, ooh, this might be me, it's not going to necessarily feel very good, and that's totally okay. But what happens when you start to do this internal work, and I will get to your question for sure, but when you start to do this internal work, you totally take your power back. Because when we're focusing on what is going wrong outside of us, we are completely powerless. Because, like you're saying, I do a lot of work around what we can control and what we can't control. And when we're focusing solely on the company and what they're doing wrong, what our boss is doing wrong, or what we don't like about XYZ, it's really honestly a waste of our time and energy because there's nothing that we can do about that. So we bring it back to ourselves. So this is such an empowering tool. And I really feel that if you're being called to it, it's probably for a reason. Probably, if it's lighting something up. What I love about this work is it's not about consistently trying to find the next best thing in your job, right? It's not looking for something outside of yourself, but it's really doing this work that will last you for the rest of your life, that you can find how you want to be happy, how you want to be successful, how you find balance specifically for you, that will carry you through any job that you have. So I think that that's, I would say if that's like, ooh, yes, I would love that, then yeah, trust that and know that, this is not the work that's going to be overnight, but it is going to be much more lasting than just continuously jumping or feeling like you want to jump from job to job to job.
And the empowerment piece is so interesting to me too, because to your first point, when you started answering this question, you talked about how it can be uncomfortable to look at ourselves, as opposed to there's something, I think, satisfying at some level to be able to point fingers at something else. And there's a self-righteousness that comes with that. And it can be temporarily gratifying. But at the end of the day, you absolutely give your power away. And so I often struggle with how to articulate this idea without sounding critical of people who might fall into that category, because I don't want to use charged language, right? Like I don't personally think a victim mentality is a useful one, but I don't like, that language can sometimes be triggering to people. So I think that it's really important for everybody to ask themselves, like, if I'm unhappy in the circumstances that I'm in, what responsibility or opportunity do I personally have here to create a different outcome or have a different experience? Because I think it is so instinctive sometimes to just blame other forces.
Absolutely. And sometimes we just don't know anything else because we've been doing it. Like it's been kind of our pattern. And that's what, kind of the work that I do is helping you get out of your own way. And I was that exact same way. It was like, screw everybody, screw everything. I was so mad. I was so mad because I felt unrest inside and I didn't know to look at my own self in the mirror, right? And like, oh, I could be holding myself back. So yeah, it can be really uncomfortable, but that's why I say this is not for people who, the time is right. Like, I guess that's too, you have to kind of be like, okay, I'm ready. And a lot of times we don't change until we're sick of our own crap.
That's so true. I remember I made a pretty major career change at one point in my life, and I was so angry all the time, and I was just not sleeping well, and I was constantly tense and anxious and just really blaming everyone around me. And I would vent to my husband all the time, and finally he was like, well, what are you going to do about it? And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh yeah, this is actually a problem that can be solved, right? There are options here. And at the end of the day, my choice was to leave and to go someplace else. But I had spent so much energy looking outward instead of thinking about what was within my control, that it finally felt good to say, oh yeah, like I have choices here. I can do something about this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great point, is a lot of times it's people outside of us that will reflect something back to us because we can't see the forest through the trees, right? We're like, wait, what do I mean? This is the viewpoint that I've been seeing through. Um, yeah, absolutely.
So do you think, and I don't know if you track this, but would you say that people who come to you generally stay in the jobs that they're in and just have a new relationship with them? Or do you think those people leave and decide there's something better out there for me? Like, what do you generally see in terms of outcomes from how you're working with them?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I came into this really hoping that I could help people in the jobs that they have now. So that's really kind of all about the work that I do, is how to be happy in the job that you have now. The book that I have is called Reset Your Relationship to Your Job. But as a coach, what I've seen is that, first of all, I will say about 95% of the people that come to me are female identifying. So I think it's just, you work with who you kind of were or you are. And what I've noticed over the years of working with kind of the same type, I guess, like very successful, achieving women in the workplace, is we hold on for so long. And I think that has so much to say about our amazing tenacity, but I also am so hopeful. Like, we don't have to be at the very end in order to make a change. But what I will see is most everyone who comes to me does not want to shift their relationship to their job now, and they really want to move on. I will say the majority of the people that I work with end up staying, and that's not even to just toot my own horn. It's just based on the work that I do. And then some do move on eventually as well, but I have no motivation to whether you stay or whether you go. What my real hope is that you can find a way where you feel really good in your job overall, regardless of where you are, where you feel like you have enough confidence to be able to have difficult conversations when you need to, when you can have that healthy detachment, where you can have that balance, work-life balance that works for you, when you can find the way that work doesn't run your life, and that you are really, again, that word, empowered in your career. So I see both, but yeah, I would say most people come to me when they're at kind of their wits' end.
Is there a first step that people listening can take on their own?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of working with me or just in general, like what to.
In general, just thinking more about moving in this empowered direction.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for sure, like this is like a little plug for me, but I post content about this stuff all the time. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn and my website, which I'll talk about probably at the end. But I think a first step, I'm trying to think, like, because can you tell it's hard for me to like give one thing for everyone?
I know.
Because I work so individually with people. But if I'm saying it to the masses, I would think like so much, if I could say something to you, is like, in your heart, like speaking not from your amazing, beautiful brain that likes to think everything through a million times, but like in your heart, are you satisfied? Do you feel like you're in a place in your career, in your job, that feels good to you? Like, would you be happy if you were still doing the same thing 10 years from now, or having this relationship with your job? And for some of us, we may like tools that we journal this out and you just kind of write it all out. For some of us, I'm a nature connected coach. So I like to invite going on a nature wander with this question, which means you just go out onto land. If you're in an urban area, you just go out on a stroll without your device and you ask this question: am I happy? Am I content? And really trust that, because what happens is, like, it's so noisy out there. Like, even us talking, we're telling you different things. But what I really hope for everyone is that we can come back to our true selves, because only you know what you really need. So I could tell you, like, yeah, if you have these things, but I think if you can just tune into yourself, when it's not so loud, when you don't have a spouse telling you, a boss telling you, a friend, a coworker, whatever. But what do you truly want? And sometimes that voice can be really, really quiet because we've quieted it over the years. So I think that feels good to me in answering that for everyone. It's like, go back to yourself and what do you really think?
I love that. I think that's a really powerful starting point and just something for us to, I would offer up as something to do regularly, right? I mean, have a annual or twice a year check-in with yourself to say, am I happy? Am I doing my best work? Am I where I want to be? Because like you said, too often we wait until things are really bad and then it gets that much more complicated. Whereas if we can pick up on some of these signals earlier, we can intervene earlier and hopefully prevent some of the pain and crisis that might come down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah. I encourage a seasonal check-in because, it's just going with nature's seasons. And we have different points in our life. And I think that's important is just because we are somewhere today doesn't mean we're going to have the same wants and needs 5 years from now. Me, for example, like our son's almost 16, we're kind of learning this new empty nester way and we have more time. So I'm like, I would love to take on more, as with 5 years ago, it's like, I need a little bit less and have to figure that out. So I think, yeah, checking in regularly is so important.
So where can people find you, Taylor? You mentioned having a website and also that you post a lot of content. So if others are interested in following you or learning more, where can they find you?
Mm-hmm. So I have kind of 3 different places that I regularly post content to, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then YouTube as well. And those are all under my handle, Harmonious Return. And then my website is harmoniousreturn.com.
Perfect. Well, this has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for having it with me. And I am really excited to share it with the community.
Yes, it's been so fun. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.